Hey there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is part 4 of my 2018 Simon Says Stamp limited edition holiday card kit. So if you've missed parts 1 through 3, go ahead and head back to the channel so that you don't miss those. Today is going to be all about an ornament. I'm going to use that Salvaged Santa that came in the kit along with some alcohol inks, and I am going to paint that thing and we are going to make an ornament. So I've got the alcohol palette there. You wouldn't necessarily need to use that, and I've got several alcohol inks. I will tell you what they are as I pull them out to use them. But you wouldn't have to have the palette. You could use like a glass plate or the glass mat if you happen to have the Holtz glass mat. There are a lot of options. You wouldn't necessarily have to have the palette. I like the palette because it does keep the inks very contained, and then I can set those aside, and if I want to use those colors again, all I have to do is pull out the blending solution to reactivate those colors. So I'm also using some brushes. They're the alcohol ink brushes. I don't think there's anything really special about them other than the fact that I'm going to keep them separate just for my alcohol inks when I want to paint with them. And I just put a little bit of cranberry into my alcohol palette, and I'm just picking up that alcohol ink with my paintbrush, and I am putting it all over the Santa where I want him. I chose some more darker tones because obviously when you're coloring with the alcohol inks, it isn't going to be perfect. And I like that because I don't think I could have painted him perfectly, to be honest with you. And I also like it because I wanted him to be vintage looking. So I chose a darker color palette. And so I'm using the cranberry instead of like a brighter red. I thought the cranberry would be a nice muted red color. One of the things I discovered about the alcohol inks is that you can go over them and over them, and you might get a darker tone, but remember these are alcohol inks, and so they are going to react the same way they would on the papers that you would use, the Yupo paper or anything else. They're going to push against each other. So if I put that cranberry right on top of the cranberry again, it's going to push against the cranberry once it dries, and it'll give you, it's actually a very interesting effect. As you can see, it's not giving me a perfect blend, and I don't want that. So I'm going to just keep going. I'm going to move on to his legs now using that same cranberry ink on his legs. And I do make a mistake here. I forgot that Santa has, well, he's got the white fluff above his boots. And I suppose you wouldn't necessarily have to do that. It would be fine, but it does show up on this little Salvaged Santa, this little resin Santa. And so I went ahead and colored that, but it's a super easy fix because you're using alcohol inks. And I'll show you how I do that. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and keep coloring his pant legs. And I've only sped this up 2 times because I wanted to make sure to show you as much of the coloring as possible. And as you can see, I left that part of the fluff above his boot, the clear color. So I'm going to use some blending solution along with my paintbrush, and you can wipe up your mistakes just like that. That's another reason why I like these alcohol inks. They, especially on this resin, is that it's super easy to clean up any mistakes that you might make. I'll just pick it up and wipe away, and then I'll use my cloth there, which is just a microfiber cloth, and I can wipe away any mistakes that I made. And I'm not trying to make it perfect, the cleanup, simply because this is going to be a more vintage Santa, obviously, so I want him to be a little bit splotchy in areas. And once I'm happy with the coverage for the cranberry, I'll eventually move on to his little face. And there isn't much to that, but I really end up liking how these alcohol inks work on these resin images. I might have to pick up some more of them. And where I don't like parts, I'll just wipe away with that blending solution and grab more of the cranberry. Now I'm grabbing some peach Bellini, just a little bit of it. I'll put that in a separate little reservoir on my palette, and then I will start coloring his face. And like I said, it's a very small area, as you can tell, so I don't need to do a lot. With my alcohol inks, I actually have a swatch book. Maybe one of these days I'll show it to you if it's something you're interested in. But that's how I'm able to pick out my colors, because if I just went basically off of how they look outside the bottle, yeah, I'd have a very hard time. Now I've moved on to using some espresso alcohol ink, and I'm going to use that on his boots. And I'm not worried about the bottom because he's going to be glued into the ornament. And then I'll move on to his gloves when I'm happy with the coverage on his boots. These alcohol inks are so much fun. I've done a lot of backgrounds with them, and it was fun to branch out and paint this little resin guy. It's not something I would have typically done. I wouldn't have probably said, you know what, I'm going to buy that and I'm going to give it a shot, simply because I wouldn't have known what to do with him. But because this came in a kit, I like to use what comes in the kit, so I thought, all right, let's give it a shot and let's try painting him. I do have some acrylic paints, but I thought it would be a lot more fun to try using the alcohol inks. And now I've moved on to some mushroom. I'm using that on his sack. And this is where you can kind of tell that the alcohol inks push each other away. It's pushing itself away when I try to go over parts. It's just a fun effect because the bag is very textured. So I'm really glad that the resin Santa came in the kit. I do like, as I've said a zillion times, I do like mixed media, but it isn't something I would typically do like, oh, I'll paint this figurine, because honestly I don't have enough confidence in myself to paint something like that. But since it was there and I wanted to use it, I'm happy that I gave it a try. So now I'm just using some pitch black for his belt. And I looked up some videos on painting the resin characters from Tim Holtz, and I don't think he used alcohol ink to do it, but I know that he finished up his project with distress crayons. Like, he used the brown distress crayon. I don't have that, so I wasn't going to use that. Here I'm using the gold mixative just on the belt buckle. But anyway, back to the distress crayons. I know that I think he actually colored his resin images with acrylic paints, and then he kind of roughed it up a little bit, and then he used the crayons. I got those trees from Joann's, actually. I know the price on there said $3.99, but right now if you head over to Joann's, they've got a lot of their stuff for 60% off. They usually do, or you can use a coupon. So I got these for like $1 something. And I am using lettuce right now, and then I'm going to move on to using bottle green, just to color up that tree a little bit. I didn't want it to be stark white. I want it to look like a green evergreen tree, but with snow on it. So I'm not going to completely cover it with all the green because I want a lot of that white to show through as well. And you can take a look at how that alcohol ink worked really nicely on that tree. Now we'll move on to the ornament itself. I got this ornament at the dollar store. I'm not sure if they still have those. This was Dollar Tree, and I just couldn't resist. So I put those on there with the glue gun. Sorry I didn't start filming when I put them down, but I did use my glue gun, and I let that dry for a second, and they're in there pretty nicely. And I tested it, trying to make sure that the top would go over it so that I didn't have any issues with closing up the ornament. And I'm going to show you a few things that you could use. This is the Distress Grit paste. I don't have enough of it. I wish I would have, because I would have preferred to use the grit paste. But I am going to use some Liquitex resin sand. I got this on clearance at Hobby Lobby, I think, or maybe Michael's, I'm not sure. But this stuff is great. It's opaque, and so that means it's not going to be see-through. And it has little bits of sand in it. I thought that would make a nice texture for the snow. So I'm using a palette knife, and I am going to just scoop that up and set that all along the bottom, trying to cover up the wood mount on the tree, and then just kind of putting that around Santa as well, just to make them look like they are standing in snow, trying very hard to keep it away from the edge, because I still need to be able to close this ornament, so I don't want it to go all the way to the edge. And then I'm kind of shoving that inside the tree a little bit to make it look like the snow is sitting inside the tree as well. And honestly, I haven't used this a whole lot on projects that are 3D. I use them in my mixed media projects, just in my book. As you can see, it doesn't dry white. And that's okay, because I didn't necessarily need it to be white. I wanted this to be vintage. And here's a few things you could use to fill up your ornament. You could use glitter, you could use Fun Flock, but I'm going to use some coarse salt. I thought that would be a nice touch. So I'm just going to fill up my ornament, not obviously all the way, and keeping in mind whatever you use may stick to the outside of your ornament. And then I'll close that up, and that will look like falling snow. I end up loving how this little ornament looks. I would love to know what you think, if you've tried using these alcohol inks on resin or what you've painted with them. But you'd want to make sure and close up your edge with some glue so that nobody would open that up and get that everywhere. And yeah, so like I said, I would love to know what you think. Leave a comment down below, like this video if you liked it, and as always guys, thank you so much for stopping by.